Welcome back. Let's continue to talk about Japanese history, especially the fall of the Tokugawa shogunate. And we said this is the last shogunate or the military government in Japanese history. Okay. Now, in early and mid 19th century, the shogunate has already been challenged by multiple forces, okay, including the ones from outside of the country. Okay? And we found that Dutch, British, and Americans already reached the Japan's coast and forced the shogunate to open the door and do business with the Westerners. Okay? And of course, the shogunate refused to do that. Okay, and because they believed that would eventually challenge their ruling power of the country. Okay? And even domestically, from the inside of Japanese society, there are a lot of debates and rebellions. Okay? Now, the last shogun, okay, when he took the power, initially he actually promoted a lot of the lower-ranking samurais because these lower-ranking guys are loyal to the young shogun. Okay, and however, later these samurais realized within the shogunate or the government, they could not continue to move up because the top of the shogunate did not want to share the power with these samurais. Okay, so these lower-ranking samurais becomes the force within the Japanese government, asking for open up the doors, do more reforms so that they can eventually compete with the Western societies or catch up with the Western societies. Okay? And after a long debate, and eventually, we saw more and more southern, Japanese like daimyos or samurais. They came up and challenged the shogunate. Okay? And eventually, these actually, the Japanese history turned to a new page. It's called the Meiji Restoration. Okay? Now, when the lower-ranking samurais challenge the shogunate, they don't have the legitimate position to do that. Okay, because the shogunate is the only ruling power in Japan, which is approved by the imperial court and the emperor himself, right? And so the lower-ranking samurais thought, probably we could get the emperor on our side, so it becomes legitimate to challenge the shogunate, right? And we said that the emperor did not really have any real power. Okay, everything is kind of the virtual influence. However, it's still important. Okay, even the legitimacy itself. So that's why they got the emperor on their side, and eventually they succeeded. Okay, and they removed the shogunate, and that's the new period in Japanese history. Okay, called Meiji Restoration. This period is named after the Emperor Meiji. Meiji is actually a Chinese phrase, from the classical Chinese literature. Okay, later we're going to talk about this, Japan for a long time, especially before 19th century, they keep learning from China. Okay, about history, about politics, and military, and many other things. Okay, so here is actually one piece of evidence. Even the name of their emperor, they got it directly from Chinese classic literature. Okay, so Meiji means enlightened rule. Okay, and these lower ranking samurais, as I just said, they climb to bring the power back to the emperor. Okay, so that's why this is called the restoration. Okay, or in Japanese, it's called Sano Joy. That means reverse the emperor and expel the barbarians. Okay, again, give the power back to the emperor. That sounds pretty legitimate, right? That helps these uh, the opposition forces to get more support from the general public. All right, and expel the barbarians. This is also very interesting. Again, think about what you learned from the documentaries, right? When the Westerners, uh, Dutch, British, Americans, first arrived in Japan, they were actually being considered as a barbarians, okay, compared to Japanese, right? And think about why, okay? And again, later we can talk about that during our meeting, okay? And the ultimate goal of the Meiji Restoration is to build a modern nation state. That means, remove all of these local warlords like daimyos, okay, so that they have a strong central government, okay, ruling the whole country. And they also want to build a strong army so that they can protect themselves from the Westerners' invasion. Okay, so again, here, when you look at the ultimate goals, you will realize that it's not really driven, by economic reasons or goals. Okay, all of these things, including the economic policies we're going to discuss later, are actually the tools for Japanese to build a modern nation state and a strong army. Okay, once you understand these, you won't be surprised that Japan later invaded many Asian economies, okay, including China, Philippines, and many other Asian economies during the World War II. Okay, because that's their ultimate goal. All right. And during the Meiji Restoration, the role of the government is key. Okay, it's what we're gonna spend a lot of time discussing. Okay, because once again, this is quite different from the Western experiences. Okay, when we look at in the past few centuries, okay, in Europe, in North America, we find that the governments tend to be smaller over time. Okay, and so that there are more checks and balances. But when we look at the Asia's Asians' experiences, you would find that their governments actually play a very crucial role in their economic development. Okay, here we're not trying to make any subjective or moral judgment to say that the Asians' way is better or the Western way is better. I think we could leave that judgment for you guys, okay, to make. What we're trying to say is, objectively, we believe that during the Asians' economic development, their governments plays a more active role than what we saw in Western economies. Okay. Now here, the first example about these policies conducted by the Meiji government. The first one is education. Okay. Now, in 1879, Japanese government passed the law of the compulsory education. That means the education is mandatory. So every kid during the school age should be in school receiving the education. Okay. Now, the law was passed in 1879, but it actually took years for Japanese government to eventually implement it. Okay, again, because back then not just the government, but the whole Japanese society was still, kind of the halfway, or half agricultural, half industrial. Okay, so as you can see here, in early 1870s, the primary school enrollment is about 28%. Okay, but that number increased dramatically in the next few decades. So in early 20th century, we find that the primary school enrollment already above 95%. This number is actually higher than what we saw in Great Britain, okay, in early 20th century. So you could find that, how effective this compulsory education policy had been conducted on the ground in Japan. Okay. Again, don't forget, even when you look at the secondary school enrollment rate, like in 1915, it's 8.1%. It sounds pretty low from today's perspective, right? But remember, this is what happened 100 years ago. Okay. So when we compare to other Western economies during the same time, these rates are not low at all. Okay. So this is about the education. Okay. And in the next slide, we're going to talk about other policies, conducted during the Meiji Restoration.